I assume you can all see me. I know in my screen, I'm on the upper left-hand corner. What I would like to do is to divide my talk tonight into two parts. The first part will be a discussion of how the Israeli political system works. Basically, the mechanics of how the Knesset, the Israel parliament, which is the equivalent of our Congress, elects its members, and how the prime minister and other leaders of the government are chosen. Israel has a parliamentary system, as in England and much of the world. You vote for a political party, not individual candidates. The voters don't choose the prime minister. They pick a political party. On March 23rd, a little over 2 months from now, Israel will have its fourth national election in less than 2 years. Think about it. We have our national elections once every 4 years. Their election is every 4 to 5 years, except when the government can't command a majority, in which case there will be another election. The second part of our discussion will be about the political parties and the candidates and the principles involved, and what I believe we can expect to happen. Then we will have a question and answer session where I hope I can clarify my remarks. We'll definitely have a question session. I hope I can give the answers. First, the basics. Every Israeli 18 years of age and over is eligible to vote. There is no absentee voting. Any Israeli 21 or over is eligible to be a candidate. The actual voting process is very low tech. You go to your polling station and are given a blue envelope. You go behind the screen where ballots are laid out for all the political parties with their individual candidates listed. You pick one ballot, put it in the envelope, and slide the sealed envelope through a slit in the ballot box. If you submit a blank ballot or more than one slate, your ballot is void. Pretty simple. However, though we do not, as of now, know the exact number, we can expect upwards of 15 slates or parties to be running. The Knesset has decided that the electoral threshold, as has been for the last number of elections, the number of votes you must receive to reach the Knesset will be 3.25% of the votes cast, which represents 4 seats in the Knesset of 120 representatives. This will equal roughly 140,000 votes. The exact number will depend upon how many people actually vote. Previous elections, there were approximately 70% of the 6 million eligible voters who voted. That's a fairly high percentage. Remember, in the United States, in our presidential elections, we have somewhere in the area of 55, 56% of the eligible voters who vote. The Knesset seats are divided between the parties based upon the proportion of the 120 seats in the Knesset that they receive. Here in the United States, we can reasonably expect that virtually all of the 430 representatives and the 100 senators will either be a Democrat or a Republican. So after March 23rd, Israel will have its new Knesset, represented by the parties that have won seats by the proportion of votes received out of the 120 Knessets, but no prime minister and no government. Some of the parties currently in the Knesset will fail to reach the threshold required of 3.25%, or 140,000 votes, and new parties will be in the Knesset. It is possible that the party receiving the most votes will have its leader as prime minister, but not necessarily. For example, 12 years ago, in 2009, Tzipi Livni of Kadima led Kadima, which won 28 seats, compared to Benjamin Netanyahu, who led the Likud and received 27 seats. However, Netanyahu was able to put together a coalition in excess of the 61 seats, 1/2 of the Knesset plus 1, needed to form a government. The process as follows: Reuven Rivlin, the president of the state of Israel will ask each of the parties, all 10, 12, 15, whatever number, to submit their recommendations. They may do so or not. Rivlin will then give the candidate who he deems most likely to be able to put together a coalition 42 days to form a coalition of at least 61 members of the Knesset. Since it is quite likely that no one party will have more than 35 seats, and more likely 31 or 32 seats, coalition agreements, horse trading will take place for portfolios, jobs, positions on issues, and religion and political concerns. If the person receiving the 42-day mandate from President Rivlin cannot form a government, he can then designate a second candidate to form a coalition. And if ultimately unsuccessful, new elections will be held within 90 days. It is unlikely that any party or candidate will receive as much as 1/3 of the seats in the Knesset. What I would like to do now is consider some of the main issues and the problems facing Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, as everyone calls him, has been the leader of Likud for many years and been prime minister for the last 12 years. He has strong supporters and strong opposition. He is currently under indictment and is facing trial scheduled for next month, February, for fraud, bribery, and breach of trust. Many currently in the opposition, having been part of his government and past supporters, while ideologically attuned to Netanyahu, feel that because of the corruption charges, the mishandling of the pandemic and the economy, or just because after 12 years of power, he effectively may have reached his expiration date, as far as many may be concerned. They feel that he has become a cult of personality with little respect for others. Who are some of others who are likely to be seriously considered for the prime ministership? Last April, 9 months ago, after a bitterly contested third election, Likud, led by Netanyahu, with the support of the ultra-Orthodox Shas and United Torah Judaism parties, were at a virtual stalemate with the Blue and White Party, Kahol Lavan, led by Benny Gantz, a former head of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. Gantz campaigned on the position that he would not join a government led by Netanyahu. Ultimately, citing the coronavirus that was ravaging Israel and the economic situation, he entered into a coalition agreement with Netanyahu that provided, among other things, for a rotation of a prime ministership, with Gantz taking over for Netanyahu in November of 2021, this year, and for the adoption of a 2-year budget by December of 2020, last month. Few believe that Bibi would live up to the rotation or his commitments, and Gantz's party split over his decision. Of course, there was no budget last year, and all are convinced that in any event, Netanyahu would not have lived up to the agreement. Right now, it is unlikely that Gantz or his party will even reach the 3.25% threshold, and he most likely may fade from the political scene. Within the last month, Gideon Sa'ar resigned from Likud, where he was extremely popular and had challenged Netanyahu for leadership last year, and he lost decisively. Before yesterday, this last sentence was written now. Imagine a Republican in the United States challenging Trump for leadership of the Republican Party. It just wouldn't happen, and if it did, that person wouldn't be successful. Sa'ar's New Hope Party is a formidable opponent on the right, and he has vowed never to join a government headed by Netanyahu. Last week, Zev Elkin, a leader of Likud and personally close to Netanyahu, resigned from Likud and joined Sa'ar, claiming that Bibi, in order to avoid standing trial on the various corruption charges, had subordinated the good of the country and the need to fight the coronavirus. This indicates that the opposition to Netanyahu within Likud may be deeper and more personal than previously thought. Also opposing Netanyahu from the right of the political spectrum is Naftali Bennett's Yamina Party, which is an Orthodox nationalistic party. Bennett is a self-made multimillionaire who started a number of businesses, made many millions, and sold his businesses. He spent much of his early life in the United States after having served in an elite Israel Army military unit. Likewise, Yamina has made replacing Netanyahu their primary purpose. The anyone but Bibi movement is alive and strong, and this is just the opposition on the right. These are all supportive of either applying Israeli law to the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria, or annexing most of the West Bank as part of Israel. Last week, Ron Huldaye, the longtime mayor of Tel Aviv and a former military hero, announced his candidacy and the formation of his new party, the Israelis. And then there is Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid, a former TV talking head and famous commentator who is and has been a leader of secular Israelis. Both could be called center-left parties. And there is Yisrael Beitenu, basically a party consisting of former Russian emigres led by Avigdor Lieberman. And there's a joint Arab list, which, if it can overcome its internal differences, which are many, could command perhaps 12 seats in the Knesset. Meretz, the left-wing party, will probably remain with 5 or so seats. You will note that I did not mention the Labour Party, the venerable Israeli founding party of Ben-Gurion, Peres, and Rabin. They will not make the Knesset unless they join with another party. With 2 months to the March 23rd elections, what did the polls show? The Likud remains the largest individual party with a likely 26 to 30 seats with its ultra-Orthodox partners, Shas, the Sephardic of the ultra-Orthodox party, and United Torah Judaism, the Ashkenazic ultra-Orthodox party, receiving together 15 or 16 seats. Together, they will command somewhere in the area of 45 seats. On an individual basis, Bibi Netanyahu holds a slight lead over all his competitors. For all his faults, he is the individual candidate most Israelis see as the person they can best visualize as prime minister. It is much too early to predict the likely results. The battle will most likely be between Bibi and anyone but Bibi. Let me give you my thoughts on the Palestinian situation, which probably will not bear strongly on the election itself. What is clear to me is that the next Israeli government, whoever will lead it, will be adamantly opposed to withdrawals from the West Bank or territorial concessions in order to create a new Palestinian state in the near term, if at all. Here in the United States, most believe that a two-state solution is the logical way to solve the dispute between two peoples. That may have been the case in the past, not today. As Abba Eban, the eloquent former Israeli spokesperson and ambassador to the United States, has said, the Palestinians have never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Former Israeli governments, former Israeli prime ministers, including Ehud Barak, Olmert, people like Peres, and facilitated by the US government, have offered major compromises and territorial concessions. All have been either ignored or rejected by the Palestinians. And one point further, a poll conducted last month in the West Bank and Gaza, areas occupied by the Palestinians, by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey, research showed by 59 to 40%, Palestinians oppose a two-state solution, while 75% believe that the chance for the creation of a Palestinian state alongside Israel in the next 5 years are slim or non-existent. The fact that the incoming US administration might desire such a result is not in tandem with the desires of the strong majority of the Israel public today. Before I open it up to questions and comments, let me just close by saying this. Our love and support of the people and state of Israel is absolute and unconditional. It does not depend on the result of any election or any particular policy or who is the prime minister. So I try to keep it to roughly 15 minutes so we'd have plenty of time for questions and discussions.
And everyone is now unmuted. Ike, are you raising your hand?
Yes, yeah. Can you comment on the effect of the recent Trump, quote, Trump negotiated, or whoever Kushner negotiated agreements between Israel and some of its neighbors in an African country? What effect will it have on the politics?
After that, well, let me start off by going back. In the United States, in the last election,
there's a whole
roughly
bunch of people, but we can't see them.
You know what, Philip, what I'm going to do, excuse me, I'm going to mute everyone and you just unmute if you want to speak.
That's probably a better way to do it.
Good. In the United States.
Oops, I muted you.
In the
Sorry,
United
Phillip.
States, okay. In the election that we had in November, roughly 70% of the American Jews voted for Biden, 30% having voted for Trump. If the polls also indicated in Israel, Trump would have received in excess, Trump also, but Netanyahu would have received in excess of 70% of the vote. American Jews and Israeli Jews would not have voted the same. What Trump has done in support of Israel, many Israelis believe, they really think that he has been wonderful for Israel, from moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, from recognizing its sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and for helping to bring Israel closer to what are now 4 Arab countries who have diplomatic relations with Israel. Now, many of those negotiations started as much as 10 years ago. Point is, Israelis love Trump a lot more than American Jews do. It's not a question of what you or I may believe. That's just what the facts are.
Another question? I have one. Philip, can you explain the rise and downfall of Benny Gantz? Are you comfortable with that question?
Mm-hmm. I'm comfortable with any of the questions.
Okay.
Look, I've met with Gantz. Well, first of all, Nina, in introduction, mentioned that I've been going 3 times a year for the last 20, 25 years, except for this year. Barbara and I went in February, and we're there for a week or so, 10 days, 2 weeks. Since then, we haven't been able to go because of the pandemic. When I was there, I met with Gantz. He came to the Jewish Agency meetings. He's tall, impressive, well-spoken, everything you would like as a positive. He's a military hero serving as head of the IDF. And a lot of people were delighted that he was one of the 2 major parties who was negotiating with Netanyahu. And the belief was that he would keep his word to the Israeli public. He and Netanyahu both received some 33 or so mandates, his blue and white party and Likud. The problem is you need to end up with 61 mandates in order to form a government. After the negotiations went on for some 35, 40 days, it became clear that no group could form it no government could be formed unless Netanyahu and Gantz would get together. Gantz's people who voted for him on the basis of anyone but Bibi would be very happy for him to make coalitions with any of the other parties I mentioned or any of the other people who were involved. When he decided to make a coalition deal with Netanyahu for the reasons I gave earlier, because of the pandemic, because of the economic situation, he decided it would be best to go into coalition with Netanyahu. This split his party. Some less than half of his party stayed with him to go into the government, but it was enough to form a coalition of 61, 62 members, with some breakaways from other parties. What happened is people were saying, you're being a fool. He will never keep his word. And you gave me your word when I voted for you that the one thing you would not do was go in coalition with Netanyahu. Well, it turned out that while he still claims that he did the right thing for the country, most people don't agree with him. The government fell. There's going to be new elections on March 23rd. The people just won't vote for him now because what does his word mean is what many say, even though his argument why he did it may have made some sense. It's like, you lied to me once, why should I vote to you the second time? Other questions?
I'd like you to comment on the two-state solution. I personally think it would never work. Palestinians want to take over all of Israel. I think Israel would sell themselves short by that, but what's your opinion?
Well, let's put it this way. It's not a question now of my opinion. I think it would be nice if there could be an agreement between the Jews of Israel and the Palestinians, if they could make some sort of agreement. It's not going to happen. It's not a question of whether I think it would be a good idea. There are too many Palestinians who really believe that when they talk about a two-state solution, they mean a one-state solution.
Right,
That
exactly.
they want to go home to Haifa, to Jerusalem, to Tel Aviv. They've been offered all sorts of territorial compromise, which I indicated they won't accept. And at this point, much of the Israeli public, I think a majority of the Israeli public, doesn't believe it makes any sense. And also, what you have now is many Israelis have gone further to the right of the political spectrum on the political issues of life with the Palestinians and believe that it just can't work. And they also believe, many of them for religious reasons, that Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, is part of biblical Israel, and they shouldn't give it up. Beyond the politics.
Thank you.
Philip, this is Richard Weisfeld speaking. I'm a little bit surprised at the popularity that continues for Netanyahu, in view of the fact that he's under indictment and he's going to be coming up with significant bribery charges against him. That had an effect on a significant part of the population. Has he lost votes because of that? And if he is convicted of bribery, what are the chances of him going to jail and then being needed to be replaced by some other prime minister or other individual?
It's possible, but you know, his bribery charges involve agreements that these are alleged, agreements they may have made with newspaper publishers for favorable publicity in exchange for some concessions that they got on the financial concessions. Some of them involve cigars that he received, jewelry that his wife received, that sort of thing. In other words, the things that he's charged with, many feel that he did things that all politicians do, that they're all no good, and he just got caught. And it depends on how you look at the seriousness of those charges. How serious is it to do some of those things? How serious is it to make a deal with a newspaper publisher for their support in exchange for some tax benefits?
So there was no financial dollars then that were paid to him?
Well, that's partially a claim also, that he received benefits in the form of goods. The thing is, when you live in a country like Israel, where you have such serious security concerns, and he's seen as strong on security and safety, the argument partially comes down to, so he's a little bit of a crook, so what? He's keeping us safe. He's been prime minister for 12 years, and he's done a good job on security. Now, I'm not justifying, you're asking for an explanation of why. And people see him as a strong, powerful leader and spokesperson. Some do. Remember, he's going to end up, he probably will get on a 120-seat Knesset, he's going to get somewhere in the area of 30 to 35 seats. Now, he's going to get less than a third of the votes. There's going to be a coalition because nobody will get anywhere much more than that. Now, you take Naftali Bennett. I don't remember if I mentioned this in my talk. Naftali Bennett has made many, many millions. Legitimately, he was a businessman, created businesses, sold them for millions of dollars. And he's very well spoken. He lived in the United States for a number of years when he's running his businesses. And he's good looking and he's articulate. And he believes in the greater Israel as far as where they should have control.
Philip, can you talk about the mechanics of coalition building? What actually happens? What do they do? How do they wheel and deal? And how do they actually come up with a coalition government?
Good. All right. My name is Benjamin Netanyahu. And as Bibi, I want to be head of the government. I have the largest coalition, individual coalition. I have 33 seats, 36 seats, whatever I have. You have 20 seats. Why don't we get together? You can be the defense minister or the economics minister, or the people in your party can have 4 portfolios, and my party will have 6. And the Orthodox United Torah Judaism had until recently, until the pandemic, had the health department as their chair. What do they basically want? And why are they part of Netanyahu's coalition? They want funding for their yeshivot, and they want funding for their various schools. They want their children not have to serve in the military. They don't. I mean, there are some exceptions who volunteer, but they're not required to serve in the military. And they say, fine, you want in effect, it's never said this boldly, but if you want my 15 or 16 Knesset seats that we have because members of our community voted for us, this is what we want. We want funding for our schools. We want funding for our hospitals. We want our kids not to go in the military. Now, how much are you willing to give and how much are you willing to demand? Well, this is part of the bargaining and the horse trading. Some of these people are highly competent in their areas, and some may not be. But you want to form a government, you're going to have to you're going to have to do horse trading. You're going to have negotiations. Hopefully, you will have competent people, but not always.
Bill, can I ask a question about?
Who is that? Just
Toby
introduce.
Halpern.
Oh, yeah.
What is the status of Reform Judaism in Israel, and do you expect in the future it will be more widely accepted?
We hope so. This is what, one of the things I've been working on for the last 20 years. From the time I became president of ARTSA in 1995, these are some of the things we're doing. We try to fundraise in the United States. The Israelis cannot support themselves. One of the problems is we support Temple Emanu-El. We write our checks to support the temple. The government does not support us. This is not the case in Israel. The Orthodox get full funding and support from the government of Israel. Until recently, I don't want to go into litigation as such, but until recently, Reform and Conservative Judaism did not get financial support from the government. Where they got support is from you and me. It's from our supporting pardon me, from our supporting our synagogues. We build our synagogues, we help support them. We try to encourage Israelis who can to be financially supportive. We're a small but growing movement in the state of Israel. Do I think that's the future? Yeah, because most Israelis really don't want, most Israelis do not want to have control of their lives by the Orthodox establishment. All the polls indicate that the ultra-Orthodox are not what they want to control their lives. What they really want to say is, you want to believe that way, go believe that way. But I shouldn't have to support you. I shouldn't have to send my sons and daughters to the military while you don't. Their argument, of course, is that we're supporting the state of Israel by our religious practices. And this is what saves us, that God will support us. It's, I think it's a growing movement because the future generations, somebody has, okay.
Yeah. Who is unmuted? Just Toby,
I have nothing going on.
you have nothing going on. Huh.
All right, somebody's,
Any other questions? I have a couple. Anybody?
yeah,
I have two questions. One, I was surprised to read in the Times of Israel that Netanyahu is entertaining some kind of alliance with the Israeli Arab Party. Have you heard that? And what are your thoughts about that?
yeah. All right. All right, that person is now muted or off anyway. Yeah. Who is that? You know, can you tell?
I have Marilyn. I've got Marilyn unmuted. I'm going to mute all again. I'm going to mute everybody again.
Okay. As far as Netanyahu with the Arab parties, in previous elections, one of the things he did is a couple of days before the election, he would announce to his Likud people, get out and vote because the Arabs are coming. If you don't vote, they're going to take over. None of this was true, but he did it anyway, and it worked. Well, now he sees that he has a problem, and he's trying to make somebody's.
Not here. That is so strange. Who is
Okay.
Sorry. I don't see anybody unmuted except you and me. I'm going to mute myself, but I don't have any.
Okay. What it comes down to is Netanyahu hopes that he can get some. Who is it? Barbara thinks it's Esther Rose.
It's not me.
Okay. All right, then she's wrong.
I'm waiting to ask.
It's Marilyn, but she
Uh,
finally got herself muted.
Okay. All right. This is where he hopes to get some votes. You're muted, Nina. You're muted.
We're going to
Okay.
recognize Esther after you finish answering that question.
This is his way of hoping to get a few votes. I think it's any of the members of the Arab parties who vote for Netanyahu are foolish, but it might happen. Now, I don't know if he's promised some members of an Arab party some position. Now, I don't know, but that could be.
Esther, you have a question?
Yes. Thank you, Philip. Philip, this was very good as always. You have such a great grasp of the situation. Do you think
Thank you.
that Netanyahu could get out of the grip of the Orthodox and somehow get with some other party so that he wouldn't have to make these concessions to them?
Good
But-
question.
Right now, yeah, but right now, the parties who would be his natural ideological partners are the people who have walked away from his Likud party, the Gidon Saar party and the Naftali Bennett party. And there's also some personal animosity and hostility. Netanyahu is, to the extent that he believes anything, he's right of center. The opinion of a lot of people basically is that he doesn't have any strong beliefs other than to remain in power. But if he does have any beliefs, he's from the right of center. And those people at this point have broken away from Likud and say they will not be coalition partners with him. But remember this, Gantz also said that he would never be a partner with Netanyahu. So what'll happen after the elections are completed and you're trying to put together a coalition party and you're offered positions, who knows what'll happen? There's going to have to be some concessions that people are going to have to make with each other in order to form a government. Because to get 61 mandates, you're going to have to put together 3 or 4 parties. Now, some there may be small parties, but some will be
But why
large.
did the Orthodox keep getting, why does he keep having to give?
Because the reason is that they're easy to work with. They don't want a lot of government jobs. They don't want a lot of positions. They just want funding for their institutions. And they get the funding for their institutions. I mean, they had a portfolio as a health minister, which is a minor portfolio. So their demands are small as far as government. It's large as far as funding, but funding comes from your pocket and mine. It's the government that's paying for it. And what they demand also is things like various things being closed on Shabbat. Well, most Israelis, if you go by all the polls, most Israelis feel that they should be able to drive on Shabbat and that certain supermarkets, for example, should be open, especially in communities that are not ultra-Orthodox. I mean, it's a constant push and pull on those issues.
But they seem to get their way all these years.
They do a good job in negotiating for their position, let's say. And what happens is Reform Jews, for example, in Israel, we don't have a political party as such, and we've decided we don't want a party. We belong to the liberal area, we belong to the conservative area, we belong, as far as what happens with the Palestinians, we're split. We don't have strong positions on a lot of these issues as a movement. Individuals have strong positions on questions of the economy or other issues. So it's easy when you have, quote, the rabbi, Brenner, I hope you're not listening, that you have the rabbi deciding and everybody will vote the way the rabbi wants. Doesn't work that way here. And when the Shas rabbi says you're voting for these candidates, they vote for those candidates.
Philip, can I ask you, what happened to Israel of Shimon Peres and the Labor Party? Why is it sounds like the coalitions you were talking about were all from the right.
Right now in Israel, the political views on the issue of territories and the relationship with the Palestinians, most Israelis are on the right side of those issues. By right, I mean the political right. I don't mean the correct. We can all have our opinions as to what's how we should do it. Point is, what they've also done is they've run, well, lately they've done very poor campaigns. They put up poor leadership candidates. And when you don't have when your views are not in accordance with the majority of people, you're in trouble. And right now, while the party of Ben-Gurion is the founding party, and they had control of the government for many years until Begin came in as prime minister. But remember, we always had was either people like Ben-Gurion or Begin. Now you have, well, in my opinion now, you have more politicians and less people like Begin and Ben-Gurion and Peres. You just have different type of leadership.
Phil, Phil, I have a question for you.
Who is that?
This is Howie Goldberg.
Okay,
Phil, in 13 days, we get a new president.
we have, something's wrong with your speaker, Howard.
Who knows?
Okay, that's a little better.
Well, I'm not saying anything.
It's echoing quite a bit.
Somebody, go ahead. They left.
Phil, can I ask a question? It's David. What, if any, relationship is there with Biden and Netanyahu? And what is the general feeling in Israel about the potential that there might be some reconstituting of discussions with Iran about the Iran nuclear deal?
All right, two separate questions, but they're
questions.
tied together. The first question is the thought about the Iranian deal and the possibility that our incoming administration may like to reconstitute that agreement. That's one question. And then the next question, as far as the relationship between Biden and Netanyahu. Hi. Let me answer the personal relationship one first. When Netanyahu came and spoke before the US Congress, when Obama was president and Biden was vice president, this was done over the objection of the Democratic administration. He was invited by the speaker, the Republican speaker of the House, and he came and spoke basically against the Iran nuclear deal that was entered into by the United States, Great Britain, France, Russia, etc. This did not make him friends with the Democratic administration. The president or prime minister of a foreign country comes, speaks before our Congress, and takes a position that's counter to that of our government. Whatever you may think of the issue, it doesn't make you popular with the president of the United States when you do that. There was never warm feelings between Obama and Netanyahu. And when I say Obama, that means Obama, Biden, and Netanyahu. I believe that their positions were pro-Israel. But you can be pro-Israel and not pro-Netanyahu. You can be pro the United States and not pro-Trump, or not pro-Biden. You have to differentiate between your feelings towards a given leader of a country and your feelings towards that country. I'm going to assume that most people on this call were very upset and unhappy what happened yesterday in our capital. Right. And many of you were unhappy with our president. Now, I'm not saying all of you, but many of you were. That doesn't mean that it lessens your fondness and affection for the United States. You hope things may be different. Similarly, the relationship with Israel, you can be unhappy with a given prime minister, which is why I mentioned that in my closing comments. You can be unhappy with a given prime minister. Doesn't change your feelings or affection to the country. Now, as far as the nuclear deal, most Israelis, the great majority of Israelis feel, I'm not going to go into, try not to go into my opinion on this. Most Israelis feel that Iran is a life-threatening country to the state of Israel. The leaders, the mullahs in Iran have said over and over again that they want to destroy the great Satan and the little Satan. The little Satan is Israel, the great Satan is us. We don't have that fear in the United States. Israel has that fear. They live in that neighborhood, and it's a dangerous neighborhood. So what they're worried about is that Iran, through this deal, will have the right to get nuclear weapons in 10 years. It's a short period of time. Against that, the Biden administration feels it wants to open up relations with Iran, and that one of the things it says it's going to do is going to insist that Iran must be in compliance with the nuclear deal that was made, which it is not in agreement now. Now, how the US administration is going to handle that, what it's going to do, if it really is going to insist that it goes into compliance with the agreement, and that it will discuss other issues involving terrorism, that would be wonderful. Israel doesn't believe that US will insist. It believes that US will give too much in its negotiations with Iran. Now, but the difference is the personal relationship between Biden and many Israelis is very good. The problem with Netanyahu is that he did something that was good as far as Israel was concerned, but soured his relationship with the Obama-Biden administration when he came and spoke over to Congress over the objections of the president. It may not be a simple answer, but it's not a simple situation. If there's a different prime minister, and I don't know if there will or won't be, if there's a different prime minister, the personal relationship may be better, but the underlying issues won't change because most Israelis agree about the threat of Iran. Most Israelis agree on what should be done as far as the Palestinians, which right now they think nothing should be done, that nothing can be done. Remember, you have a head of a Palestinian Authority now, Mohammed Abbas, who was elected for a 4-year term 15 years ago, and he's still serving. And he won't have elections because if he does, he will lose. And the concern is if he will lose, he may lose to Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that controls Gaza. So in one sense, we think it's terrible that he's stayed in office for all these years when he only had a 4-year term. Then again, maybe it's better the devil you know than the devil who might come after him. As people say, Israel lives in a dangerous neighborhood, and its concerns are not necessarily the same as the concerns of the United States. I mean, leaving out the problems that we're having right now with our government, go back before that, or go back to what we think will take place in 14 days, 13 days. We don't have a real fear of physical survival. Israel does. What was the other? Did I get it? I think I hit both issues. I'm not sure.
Yes.
I have a question.
Unmute you.
Several months ago, the head scientist of the Iranian nuclear development program was assassinated, killed. Iran, I think, blamed Israel. No one has ever claimed responsibility. Can you talk about that and tell us what you think happened, either behind the scenes or any information that you might have about what happened?
Let me put it this way. The Israelis, their equivalent of their Secret Service, does not call me up and discuss these issues. Right? And I do know some people, that's not my relationship. Let's just say everyone assumes that Israel was behind it, possibly with at the urging of the United States. Israel never claims that they've done any of these acts. They never deny it either. Their position basically is it doesn't do any good to claim it or deny it, and it never admits or denies. It's like, does Israel have an atomic weapon? It never admits or denies. We all know they do, but they never admit or deny.
Phil, could you speak on the unemployment in Israel now? I understand it's 20%. Is that directly or primarily attributable to COVID? Or is it always a high percentage and after COVID, will it, resume a more normal percentage?
Well, it is partial concern is COVID, but many are doing well as well. Look at let's go back to the United States now to give you an analogy. We have high unemployment. A lot of people are struggling. I assume many of you and I do contribute to food banks. But most of us, and I'm not trying to speak for all, most of us are not struggling in that sense. We're not worried about where our next meal is coming from. So yes, there's an unemployment problem, there's a hunger problem, but there is here in the United States too. But many are doing well, and many of us also feel it's our obligation to be supportive of those who need our help, whether it's in the United States or in Israel. Yes, there is a problem. Part of it is because of COVID. But if you're the prime minister, you get the blame or the credit. You're the head of an organization. So to some extent, the prime minister is blamed. And you're the president of anything. You get the credit and you get the blame. Now, is it better if there was lower unemployment? Absolutely. Nobody disagrees with that. But, the people are complaining about how Israel handled the pandemic, but yet it's done a wonderful job now in vaccinating people. It's done a terrific job. Will Netanyahu get the credit? I don't know. He might. I mean, the public can have to determine that in March. But normally, if they were doing a poor job, the president gets blamed. So if they're doing a good job, will he get the credit? We'll find out. We have an election on March 23rd. You have to unmute yourself, Joe.
What's the status of natural gas drilling off the coast of Israel, and how that is going to affect the economy?
Well, I do know they're doing it, and I do know it'll help the economy. I don't know details on that. I just don't.
Moving ahead, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, they will. Let's put it this way. They have the skill and the technology to do so many things. I mean, for a small country, they're terrific. Because I'm prejudiced, but they are.
That's called the Yiddish cup.
Yeah, okay. If you look at the number of Nobel Prize winners and all the rest, yeah, we do have we've done well as a people.
There was a question from Lida. Do you feel your question was answered, Lida?
What was the question?
The question is, can you say more about the Palestinians not wanting a two-state solution?
Part of the problem is too many Palestinians talk about wanting they don't want a two-state solution. Many of the Palestinians say they cannot make a compromise because what they want as part of their state is Haifa and Tel Aviv, etc. What Israel has offered in the past is a division of land where they would work out some sort of swaps on land. Too many Palestinians think of Israel as part of a Palestinian state. And there are others who just don't believe it. There are Israelis who don't believe in having a two-state solution because they believe that Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, is part of the biblical land of Israel. And if you believe that as a matter of religion, as the Arabs believe that this is Arab land, it's hard to work out a solution when you're taking your position based upon religion. God told me, this is what God has said, or Muhammad has said. Now we know that our God is right, but you can't make political deals on that basis that I'm right and you're wrong.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Esther? Wait a minute, I have to unmute you. I muted you. Whoops. Esther, try to unmute yourself. I'm having trouble unmuting you. Esther, please unmute yourself.
Nina, I don't know how
it.
you could
You
possibly,
got it.
mute- I don't know how you could possibly mute Esther.
You did it, Esther.
Oh, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yes, you are, Esther.
Oh yeah, Israel just completed $1 billion deal to build a flight academy in Greece. So, I mean, they're reaching out into the Mediterranean countries. And I think they're also talking about a pipeline from the the oil that they're getting. So it's so sad that the Palestinians could be doing things if they weren't such rejectionists. It's sad.
I
They could
agree.
be moving ahead in life. Yeah.
If they would just listen to you, Esther.
Well, Philip.
I'm serious,
Philip,
guy.
Philip, do you
Philip,
think
you're a
that, go ahead,
big
Esther.
mother. Tell them.
Philip, do you think, this might be the last question, do you think the Abraham Accords will influence the Palestinians to be more flexible, to be more willing to recognize Israel?
Well, you would hope it would, because what's become clear, I mean, the negotiations with many of these states, with UAE and Bahrain, have been going on for over 10 years. This is nothing new. There's been these business deals and political arrangements have been going on for years. Now they're becoming public. And there's a decent chance, we shall see, that there'll be an arrangement with Saudi Arabia once the current king dies and there's a new administration here. It's possible. From Israel's point of view, the Palestinian issue is not the be all or end all. It used to be you could not make peace with the Arab states until you made a territorial agreement with the Palestinians. Well, now so many of the Arab states see Israel as a strong ally, especially in relation to Iran. Israel is not seen by most Arab states right now as a country that it can't work with because of the Palestinian issue. The problem is most of the Palestinian street, the average person, is concerned with that. The leaders of the Arab states are basically working with Israel. They know it's in their best interest. It's a situation that's developing positively for Israel. But in the long run, something has to happen with the Palestinians. I don't know what or when, because right now there's no Israeli government or Palestinian leadership that's willing to make the necessary compromises.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you, Philip, so very much. Thank you all for participating. It was very enlightening and so appropriate. Thank you so much, Philip.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll do it again in the
Thank
future.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you. We need an
Speak to you
update.
soon. Be well.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Shalom, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Very
shalom.
well done, Philip.
Tov
Thank you.
me'od.
Okay.
I'm going to end the meeting now, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.